driven by everybody else. But then before we kind of get into your questions and whatnot, kind of want to talk a little bit about the things that have happened over the past month, because there's some exciting contributions. And then so whenever this UI tells me that we're actually recording, I'm going to stop filibustering for a little bit. And then I'll get this tab over here. Oh, I do need a volunteer for a note taker. Any takers? Jaime, if you can just type in like one word or two every, I don't know, 20 words, that'd be like extremely fantastic. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. But yeah, so this is the monthly cartography meeting. It is June 24th. It is extremely sunny here in Seattle. I think we got a lot of people from other places, a lot of new faces at this meeting. Very excited. And so I'm just going to go through some very quick housekeeping to talk about things that have happened since the last meeting. And so this looks like, yeah, back over. I'll just go starting over from here. So I started introducing this idea of having query builder functions. And with the query builder functions, the idea is that we're trying to generalize the way that we are writing nodes to the graph so that we don't run into weird Neo4j database oddities. Next, Kedar actually added in extended support for AWS Lambda. Ryan Lane, who is a new contributor, he added the ability to make analysis jobs configurable, so you can configure like where the read location is. Before it was like hard-coded to this one folder. Kedar added another feature where you have enhancements with you have now support for AWS AMI images on an EC2 instance, and so some other performance enhancements with EC2 as well. Ryan added ELB listeners. Again, he added another bug fix here, another bug fix here. So, thank you very much, Ryan. And I kind of want to highlight this PR where so this is from Fee, who is working with us, and I'm very thankful for her work. And then is she in the call right now? Did she join? And that's okay. It's like 6 a.m. where she's at, so that's totally okay. But this feature is something very exciting. And Marco knows that I've been kind of talking about this for a while, and then technically I've been sort of almost overselling cartography, kind of lying a little bit when I said that, oh, if you have an EC2 instance and it gets popped, you want to find out what IAM role that it can assume, and then what kind of path that your attacker can get after that, then we know how to do that. Well, the actual truth is we did not know how to do that until Fee went and implemented this feature. So the idea is that you have the EC2 instance. The EC2 instance has an IAM instance profile. That IAM instance profile tells you what IAM role that EC2 instance is able to assume. So if an attacker were to get code execution running on that instance, they would be able to extract credential from the metadata server, become that IAM role that is pointed to by that IAM instance profile. And then so we do have an analysis job that Fee implemented that draws this relation. Actually, the drawing action happens, where is that? Analysis, it happens here. So then this is where you find out that we draw a relationship from the instance itself to the IAM role. So very excited about this. And that's basically it in terms of features that happened over the past month. And then so let's see. So before we get into anything else, are there any bugs or PRs that anybody wants to raise? There's some things that I can kind of talk to. I know that there are some people that are unable to make it to the meeting today that would like a little bit of an update on the status of their reviews and their PRs. But again, wanted to make this meeting be participator, I guess, participator driven.
So I'm new here. So I basically downloaded your repository.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to load our AWS account. And I got a bug that It's a time zone offset range bug issue. When I was trying to load KMS keys, I get unable to construct offset date time value. I can paste it in the chat. I don't know if anybody's seen this. I was going to put an issue out, but I haven't had a chance to do that yet.
I've actually never seen that before. Yeah, I don't. Let's see.
And I get the same error when I try to load API gateways.
Interesting.
So for the time being, I don't need those resources in my model, so I just commented them out. But I can post an issue out with more of the details.
Yeah, yes, please. I would like to hear more about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kadar. Isn't that like both your code?
Yeah. Yeah, that's both my codes. Yeah.
Sorry to put you on the spot there. No, but I've never seen that problem before. But before we let us rule things out. I guess some things to check. Like you're running Neo4j 3.5, right?
Yeah, I'm running whatever is in your guys's repository.
Okay. Yeah, do file the issue, and then we'll take a look.
Okay. Yeah, I just haven't had a chance to put the issue, but I'll put it out. If not later today, early next week.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for letting us know. All right, real fast. I'm gonna go over. Let's see some current PRs that are open up right now. I still owe Kedar some reviews when it comes to EBS snapshots and reserve instances. Marco, I don't know if you have some extra cycles, but then if you're able to give like some quick once over, very much appreciate that. I'll do what I can too. But again, like I tell like all maintainers and whatnot, this is all volunteer work. So yeah, any bit of help is very much appreciated. I think Ryan has a PR to add support for RDS clusters. I think that there's some bug fixes involved here. This PR needs a little bit more thought from myself about general purpose functions for graph writes. We talked about this in depth in the previous meeting. This idea of having one function where all of the writes happen to make things more generic, and then the thing that me and Kunal have been talking about is how do we is this the right time to introduce something like the concept of a data class, something like a marshmallow schema or something, where if we're as long as we're doing this general function of getting arbitrary node labels written in this way, and making it putting all of these functions down through this funnel, so to speak. Maybe we want to introduce this idea of like a marshmallow schema or something so that we get other benefits like automated documentation. I don't know, just something that's kind of been thinking about. And then also like the tricky part too is that we're going to have other plugins that will not be able to readily adopt this funnel, this approach. So the project eventually will be in a state where we have legacy modules and kind of newer modules that use this new way of performing writes to the graph. And that's all I have to say about that so far, unless anyone has any questions. If not, then there is this PR from Luis on GCP VPN gateways and tunnels. Again, help wanted, reviewers wanted. I gave it a first pass, and then I think that probably would need to ping Luis for, I guess, some follow-up. I think that he hasn't written back in a little bit. And yeah, so Luis, if you're listening, come ping us again in chat. And I might as well finish the rest of these. And so Chris has this PR for, this is actually pretty exciting. He's been working for a while, for like maybe several months now, on this idea to have route table support in AWS. And this PR is like nearly done. And then I've added some, I guess, sort of admittedly nitpicky comments. And like his idea of having a route table would kind of look like this, I imagine. So you have where, actually, I would, I'm not going to talk to this impromptu. I would have to reread it again. But let me see. The one nitpicky comment that I had was that it needs to. I took a little bit of issue with like how long its write function was. So, for example, where is that merge? I'm not going to go waste everybody's time and go dig for it. But then the issue is that the load function was essentially very, very long, and then it has lots of different merge statements in it. And then so I have concerns about running that with like a lot of assets. Chris says that he's run it with a lot of assets already, so it perhaps it is not an actual issue. But anyway, again, like all things, more eyes are appreciated. So there's lots of different PRs out there. So if you have time to perform reviews, yeah, much appreciated. There's this PR that's been open. I'm going to keep this open to migrate to Neo4j 4 because Neo4j 3.5 will be end of life by, I think it is November. And then so eventually we're going to keep this PR open to sort of, keep ourselves informed of that fact. And finally, this final one, initial support for OCI. And I think that there were some changes here for this one that simply, I think that it just needs some cleanup. And then Siler gave a pretty good contribution. Like I think this was like a while ago, but some time needs to be taken to bring it back up to date with the rest of the master branch. And yeah, that's the state of PRs right now. Are there any questions or comments or anything so far? Cool. All right, and then so with that, I think that let's see. Let's kind of go to topics, and then so I want to talk. Let's see. Who added? Oh, you added that. Okay, cool. And extensibility. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about extensibility since I think it was Charles that was asking about ways to, or at least you mentioned this idea of being able to visualize how in your environment something is going to get deployed to production.
Yeah, that's kind of the basic concept. If I had some type of a key that I could follow through our ticketing system, through our GitHub system, right on into AWS, and I can kind of track features that get deployed and the code that touches those features.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys have an Intel module for GitHub, which I want to try that next. See if I can import our GitHub. I don't know. Does it import like commit history or PR history?
It does not.
Okay, so I'd probably need PR history because in the PR they could put a tag in there or something that I could look at.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Just since you mentioned the GitHub integration, I was wondering if you have thought about GitHub Advanced Security. All my questions, by the way, tonight are going to be around vulnerabilities. So if we're using that with maybe CodeQL, Dependabot findings, it would be nice to be able to pull those in. What do you think of that idea? I mean, does that fit with your idea of how cartography should work, or is that something crazy? Is it just something somebody hasn't implemented yet?
I know of GitHub Advanced Security. I know of Dependabot, but I don't know of them particularly in depth. But we have done lots of things with cartography with respect to vulnerability management. I think myself and Kunal could kind of speak a little bit in detail with that if needed. Like we've got like a blog post kind of drafted up right now to sort of explore those aspects and share them more broadly. But like, what were you sort of thinking? Can you tell me a little bit about GitHub Advanced Security Dependabot? Like, what sort of thing you were envisioning, and maybe kind of give more context for someone like me that's not super familiar with those things.
Yeah, sure. So sorry, Charles, first of all, by the way, I've kind of butted in here. First, because you mentioned GitHub, but also because you're putting a bunch of things together to get deployment in your case. You want to know your deployment times. Well, I'd love to pull a bunch of stuff together to answer the kind of question that is, how many vulnerabilities do I have in a project? Now, of course, a project exists with a bunch of AWS resources, for instance, and a bunch of code, right? Now, the AWS resources might have vulnerabilities in terms of AWS config has found a misconfiguration. It might have some EC2 instances and some vulnerability scanners there have found some out-of-date packages, and it might have some code as well, right? Which has some findings. So I want to kind of group together all those findings. I think the graph that you have that you're using in Cartography would be a great way to visualize that, tell people where the problem actually is. I think far too often security teams focus on just the vulnerabilities on the VM. So I think that's the natural, the older way of thinking, right? Where actually maybe some of the vulnerabilities that are coming up in the code base are more important, right?
Absolutely.
So it'd be great to see them all side by side, joined up on some key, potentially I could tell which of the EC2 instances in my project have this bit of code if I put the right links between things.
Absolutely.
In that way,
I've kind of got an idea that, well, I'm going to speak to a couple of things that I think are going to hit both you and Charles's questions. So I think that internally at Lyft, so we run Kubernetes, right? And then so Kubernetes, we look at it's orchestrated Docker, basically. You have like a bunch of Docker images, and then all of those images get, all of your services, all of our microservices, they have images that are built, and then we want to be able to do something like managing all of the vulnerabilities that apply to each of our services. To do that, we have a feature that's in open source cartography that will represent all of those images saved up on Amazon ECR, so Elastic Container Registry. And the thing that is kind of necessary here, and the reason why it's not exactly able to be written in cartography itself, is because our representation of what a microservice isn't really translatable anywhere else. And then so this is kind of going to Charles's point, where no matter what, like when you're integrating like any sort of vendor security tool or adopting an open source tool like ours, there's always going to be something where your company or organization is going to need its sort of secret sauce, where you're going to need to represent your own notion of what a service looks like. And then so this is where I would encourage you to kind of write your own internal cartography module as a plugin to represent your service as like its own nodes in the graph. And this is actually a fairly straightforward process. We have lots of documentation on how to do this. And so the idea would be to find a way to represent your own services in your own graph, and then from there map those to what sort of vulnerabilities would apply in your situation. For us, we got services that run Kubernetes that are that have images, and then those images are built from other base images, and then there are vulnerabilities that apply to them every step of the way. So like the base image has vulnerabilities, and then all the way down to like this lineage hierarchy where the service itself will have its own vulnerabilities. And so like in the graph structure, we'll want to do things like filter out all of the issues that are introduced by the base images, and just so that we can tell the service owner that these are your issues that you introduced, and that so you would need to go and fix them. And we know that, with a high degree of confidence that it wasn't introduced earlier in that hierarchy. And anyway, so that's like basically a little bit of color and background from where we've kind of approached one of the problems that we've had with vuln management, like at Lyft. And so your organization is going to have its own way of doing vuln stuff. And yeah, so I'm just talking about images, and yeah, like you mentioned, there's also things like SAST and DAST, and thinking about like a code issues in code. And if we have that said, like very much welcome any contribution to like ingest something like from Dependabot or Advanced Security or other things like new data connectors. The process, like I said, the process of adding in new plugins, I think Marco can talk to this also. Kedar can talk to this also. Like it's honestly pretty straightforward.
Okay, thanks for the explanation.
Sure. Hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of background and context. Was there something, feel free to start like more in-depth conversations on Slack also, and then we kind of pick it up over there. But yeah, to both of your points, like every company is different, and every service is going to be different. And then so I think that one of our strengths is not necessarily that we're the best at representing AWS, we're the best at representing GitHub. Probably not. But what we are good at is like joining these different things together and being adaptable in an environment, because at the end of the day, you're going to want to write custom scripts anyway.
Yeah, if I can give one little, just add in one little thing here. If you were to go in and add like a service node type for your company, and then in the open source add a Dependabot module and like a GitHub event security module, I think you'd contribute to open source, you'd get lots of great feedback on that, and you'd be able to really easily integrate it in your company. So writing a small module that, I don't know, maybe pulls from S3 and ingest like the schema of your, or like the general architecture of your microservices architecture, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, in the reality, we've like I mentioned earlier, we've got our own project, right, which is not open source. It's all internal. It's all custom. We're writing what we call collectors. They're like your Intel modules. We're pulling from a bunch of these things already. So it might just be a matter, if we choose to use Cartography, just translating them over to the way that you guys work and maybe trying to open source it. That's what's going through my head at the moment.
Awesome. Right.
Awesome. Anything else that I kind of missed with both of your questions, or is there something else that you kind of wanted to take in a different direction? I'm sorry, I kind of like lumped both of your questions into one.
Yeah, no, I think we got, or I think I got, and to Mike, we have the same exact question that we want to ask of ours. So, but the one thing, now I'm just new to the code base, but like say I had just this big JSON blob that I wanted to load.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an Intel module to load that?
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, like there's no general solution that will take arbitrary JSON and then fit it through like the graph. You'll have to do some of your data massaging on your own. That said, we do have really good examples that are literally copy pastable, and you're just going to need to like change out some text here and there.
Okay, because I think that, just because I can get like JSON data from our ticketing system, and I can get JSON data from our system X and system Y and system Z. So to get started, I don't know that I would write a full-blown Intel module to do that. But to get started, I'd just grab that JSON data and load it in if it was easy enough to do, and then start building my graph.
Absolutely. And to kind of go into this very briefly, so under docs and then under dev, and then you can kind of look, okay, I think the developer guide kind of tells you, like, I think you followed already all of this, like how to do, it sounds like you've already gotten it running. So you know about most of this and running tests and whatnot. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier with running custom sync commands. So like if you wanted to build like a custom sync for your own company and you can kind of implement it like this. And more in depth, like if you want to do something like loading in arbitrary JSON, so you would go to how to write a new Intel module and sort of every Intel module kind of has like these three general steps. So the get step will be grabbing stuff from an external API. You won't need that likely because you already have the JSON. So your get function could simply be grab it from an S3 bucket, grab it from a file. But anyway, the return type of this will be a list of dictionaries. And the transform step will take that data returned from the get, and then it will perform all the data transforms that you need if necessary. And finally, it sounds like this is the part that's most interesting to you with the load step. We'll take all that transform data, and then it will ingest it to Neo4j. And then so it follows this pattern of like a, there's like lots of different examples on how to do a load properly, but the one that I will kind of highlight right now, let me see if I can find a poster child. I think that, is this good? I know Marco wrote this. No, I kind of wanted to use unwind. It's close, not quite. I'll find another example. Sorry, Marco. So the one that I kind of wanted to highlight, the one that I wanted to highlight here. Okay, so this is a load function, and essentially all it does is that it takes in that list of dictionaries, and then you have a couple of different string fields that you might need, other strings. This is like your specific stuff, essentially. So you takes a list of dictionaries, the graph session object, and then you write a query. And you can kind of basically just copy this query yourself and then kind of massage it to like whatever you want it to be. In this case, we're creating like an elastic MapReduce cluster, setting some fields, and then loading it up and connecting it to a AWS account. And you can test this out yourself. And then if there's like a couple of different videos on how to get testing working. But if you run into hiccups, definitely hit us up on Slack.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. And then let's see. So the next topic that we got going on, I think that, yeah, so this is it. Yeah, thanks for the notes, by the way, Chaim. This is really helpful. And okay, go ahead, Marco.
Just FYI for everyone, as some of you might know, I've been working to make it easier for people to deploy cartography on K8s. I started by releasing a full open source deployment back in March. What I'm doing nowadays is working to open source the connector for Elasticsearch. So to sync cartography data from Neo4j to Elastic for those who use Elastic as a CM. Basically, that's what I'm doing at the moment. Hopefully that should be ready in a week or so.
Marco, that's the coolest news I've heard all week. We will be using that like right away.
That's good to know. That's it, just FYI.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much. Very exciting stuff. Let's see, and I think that's kind of all the topics that that I had. I've exhausted mine. If there's any other topics anybody wants to bring up for the recording, if not, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So I was going to say, what got me interested in cartography was a conference talk done by Sasha.
Yep.
In that, at the very end, he mentions how you sort of support this kind of history. So obviously, your graph doesn't keep history, right? It gets regenerated every time. And you had this, if I'm getting the names right, I think you had this like Intel juicer or something. You pulled everything out of the graph and put it in a traditional kind of RDS, or sorry, relational database, and then put BI tools on top of it. Are there any advancements in that since the talk? Is that still what you'd recommend? I mean, I definitely have that requirement to kind of keep a history of if this is still on topic of vulnerabilities. Yeah, I want to know that we're doing better than we were doing 6 months ago on total vulnerabilities, or how long our vulnerabilities have been open. Ask those kind of questions.
Yeah, very good question.
Yeah,
I'll talk kind of so like that was the solution that we had before, where we would, if you wanted to do things like, oh, perfect time for Nicholas to join, by the way. We're about to talk about the kind of some flight stuff and the airflow stuff. And so basically the old workflow, if you wanted to get any sort of dashboard or intelligence out of cartography, there's more than one way to do this. And then the way that Sasha presented was that you would have a relational database and then periodically have a job that's essentially going to query the graph for the query that you want, and then ingest that and then load that over to the relational database. And then, it was sort of a very fast, get it done type of deal. And it kind of is difficult to maintain, though, because now you have two different databases to maintain. You have two very big problems here. And also, you're going to need to maintain indexes, make sure you're doing relational database correctly. You're going to need to make sure that you need to make sure you maintain the table schemas, right? And then so that's additional complexity that somebody, if you're just wanting a new business report with like bars and graphs or whatever, then it's a lot of work for not a lot of gain, honestly. And then so with that in mind, one thing that Nico here was experimenting on was kind of, because essentially this is an ETL job. So for like a moving stuff from one database to another type kind of job. And then so Nico, maybe can talk a little bit this in more detail, but then you've done some experimentation with moving graph data essentially over to, I guess, what you call using Airflow or Flight or other sort of workflow tools to, why don't you talk about that?
Sure. The kind of original goal of the work I'm doing is to surface the cartography data in some of our reporting tools. So we can have dashboards, reports, etc. And those tools all require essentially an SQL interface. Neo4j has one, but you know, it seemed like given what we were doing, it would be useful to actually store one of those. And we used to have an option for something like that where we, you know, kind of periodically scrape some data out and then put it in an RDS instance, and then, you know, that went to a dashboard. Unfortunately, you know, then you have to maintain an RDS instance, and, you know, you're running a cron, and it seemed like we could do a little better since Lyft has a fair amount of data infrastructure to take advantage of. We actually support 2 different execution / scheduling systems. We have Airflow and we have Flight. You know, Airflow you've probably heard of. You know, you can represent data as you know, as a DAG, or as a directed acyclic graph kind of tasks. Flight is very similar, a little more ML focused, also open source. At Lyft, Flight is the preferred solution for various reasons, but, you know, ultimately it's somewhat of a distinction without a difference in terms of being able to run a bunch of tasks like this. So the other advantage of these kind of systems is that you'll have them integrated with your data warehouse, right? Most of the teams using these are doing analytics, batch processing offline, and this means they'll be using stuff like Spark or Hadoop if they're super old-fashioned still. And then you'll have that hooked up to, you know, like S3 for, you know, the actual storage. And so you don't have to maintain your own stuff. Some data team does that if you're lucky enough to have one. So right now what we can have is we have these jobs that will pull data from cartography, stick the data into a schema in S3, and then trigger some reports in our reporting system via an API call and refresh data. And we're looking at integrating this a little bit into vulnerability management and building more complex workflows. And there's, you know, what I think one can do a lot of this. You know, whether to store it in RDBMS kind of format might be a little contentious, but there's lots of interesting stuff once you have the data in Spark. You know, it's really, really easy because you're segmenting stuff on day. You have a great way to compare data, kind of data day, data month, you know, data year, depending on your retention. So, yeah, Alex, any more comments?
Yeah, I think that the huge win that we got here was the flexibility, so that essentially we're running, what was it, like initially you prototyped it as a notebook, right? And then you're able to essentially run that notebook. I guess that was the initial prototype.
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good point. So, right, the modern, like I'm more of an infra guy actually, but the modern data scientist and data engineering flow is pretty slick from when you look at it from kind of other software engineering perspectives. They're using like Jupyter notebooks and interacting with all their stuff. And it's, you know, say what we will about Jupyter notebooks in Git, but it's a really nice development flow from the user perspective where you can kind of experiment with stuff real time with your systems and, you know, just have it working. And it's pretty slick. So I actually have considered, I sent Alex a PR the other day for our internal stuff on doing cartography queries in Jupyter as kind of an example tutorial. You know, maybe that PR is something better moved to the open source side, and then we could combine it with the Docker Compose. So you could just spin up a Jupyter, like a Jupyter instance in Docker Compose, have all your notebooks, and then run them too.
Yeah, maybe, for sure.
Yeah. It's more, we have to have the Docker Compose stuff is in, isn't it?
Yeah, that's in. Yeah,
oh, okay.
Ryan contributed to that, so like you can run Docker Compose and it'll do the GitHub stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a work item to actually, I mean, this is probably not going to happen in the next month, but to get Airflow in our Docker Compose and kind of write some sample Airflow jobs to show how some of the stuff would work on the open source side.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for all the explanation on, I guess, the DAG ETL pipeline stuff. But like, yeah, going back to, I guess, kind of, I guess the long and short of Mike's question. Yeah, so we've done that initial approach with like RDS databases, and then we're kind of experimenting with this new approach using DAG ETLs. And this gives us a lot more flexibility in the sense that we don't have to maintain rigid schemas. And then new people can simply go ahead and copy paste old queries, and then boom, now you have, now you're able to support multiple queries, and then you can surface that a whole lot more easily in dashboards and whatever your, whatever view you want to see it in. And Marco actually has published a blog post on doing something different. Like I said initially, like there's like many ways to do this, accomplish this problem. And Marco, like what he did was he, I believe, wrote it out to Elastic, and Elastic has like its own built-in dashboarding. I think that maybe I can link to the blog post as well.
Yeah, I can put a link. This is also what I'm working on to open source at the moment. Yes, Neo4j gets overwritten every time you run an ingest. So what we do is basically, and also giving access to Neo4j to different people. There is no RBAC in the community version. So what we did is use Neo4j just as a buffer to create the relationships, and then sync everything to Elastic, and have Elastic for time series and for dashboards and for alerts with ElastAlert. So basically, since our SOC uses Elastic, my previous employer SOC, we decided to basically move cartography data also in Elastic, have everything there, not to have another system to use and to look at, basically. I can provide a link in a second.
Yeah, thanks. That'd be really helpful. Just to talk about our internal solution, if anyone cares. You know, we've got a lot of data in Athena. We don't do a lot of cleanup beforehand, and then we sort of do all our reporting straight from that. But I think we find that the Athena and all the Presto functions you have to write are not very accessible for many of our users to write new queries and explore the data that we actually collect. So that's sort of one problem I'm looking to, you know, how can we solve that? So potentially, you know, Cartography does a nice version of this.
Sweet, thanks for sharing the blog post. Yeah, read all of these. These are great. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I need to drop. I need to go pick up my kids. So I'll watch the rest of this on the video. Thanks for all the insight.
Of course. Let us know if you have questions. All right. Thanks for joining, Charles.
Yep. See ya.
Okay. Well, so typically, I'm going to, if there's no other new formal topics coming into the document, I'm going to go ahead and then turn off the recording, and then we can kind of like hang out offline if anyone else wants to do that. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. All right, cool. And